Thanks for checking out this video. For a full list of materials used in this project, head down to the description below and click on Show More. We're going to begin by working in the center of our snowflake, and this is where our 10mm Rivoli is going to sit. I have on my thread here 18 seed beads, 18 of my Miyuki seed beads. My first bead that I picked up, I use that as my stop bead. So I have my stop bead here and then 17 additional beads. Let all your beads fall down to the stop bead so they're all together. And then we're just going to take our thread, take all of these beads, make a little circle, and with our needle, pass through the stop bead. And we're going to continue through all 18 of these beads, and then we're going to go through again. I want to have a couple, I want to have my thread going through this circle of seed beads a couple times, because this is where everything else in my project is going to build off from. So it doesn't hurt to have a little extra bit of thread in there. They're 80 seed beads, so you're still going to have plenty of room in that hole of the seed bead to come back and work with it. So I've gone through a couple times, and that just helps stiffen things up and will make it easier as I work to keep everything close together so that my 80 seed beads don't separate as I work. My next step here is going to be building a bit of a bezel around this. And my 10mm Rivoli is going to sit in the center here. So the prongs on my bezel here are going to hold that 10mm Rivoli inside. Coming out of one of my 80 seed beads, I'm going to pick up one 11 seed bead and one 15, and then another 11. So I'm going to have an 11, an 11, 15, and an 11. And let that fall down to my 80 seed bead. And I'm going to go back through that seed bead. So I'm going back through the same bead that I just went through. And that will then attach the 11, 15, and 11 to the outside of that 80 seed bead. And I'm going to do this again. So I have 11, 15, and 11. And I already have one group of seed beads attached here. So I'm just going to go through that 80 again for a second time. And I'm adding a second prong. So these are going to be our prongs. So if I pull them apart here, you see I have one prong facing to the front and one facing to the back. Coming out of that seed bead that I've been working with, I'm going to go through the next 3 seed beads. So the next 3 80s, and I'm going to repeat the same steps. 1 11, 1 15, and 1 11. Loop back through that 80 to create that prong. And again, an 11, a 15, and an 11. And again, loop through, wrap around that 80 again. And just be careful that as you do this, your prongs, your set of 3 beads, stay separated and they don't cross over each other, because you're going to need to pull one to the front and one to the back of your project. So we're going to continue in this way until we come back to the beginning here. Going to pass through 3 seed beads and then begin adding my 2 prongs. Continue until you get all the way back to the beginning, and we will continue from there. After adding all of the prongs, so you'll see you'll have 6 sets of 2 prongs, so you'll have 12 prongs total. After connecting all of these, we are going to start connecting them on the front and the back to create a bezel for our Rivoli here. I have my thread coming out of one of the 8-ohs, and I want my thread to be coming out of one of the 8-ohs that is sitting directly below those prongs. So if your thread isn't there, go ahead and just travel through your ring of 8-ohs a little bit until you're sitting or you're coming out of one of those 8-ohs with the prongs. You're going to go up through the 11-oh and the 15 of that prong. And from here, we're going to connect all of the prongs on the top side of the project with one 11-oh seed bead. Coming out of the 15, I'm picking up just one 11-oh seed bead, and then going to the next prong and going through that 15 and giving that little pull, and I'm just continuing around, connecting all of the 15s and picking up that one 11-oh in between. Coming out of the 15, picking up one 11-oh, and going through the next prong, through the 15 of that next prong. And so you can see as I do this, it is going to pull the prongs inward, creating that bezel, creating that little net that will capture and hold the corner or the outside edge of my Rivoli. So I'm going to go ahead and continue all the way around, connecting the prongs on one side of my bezel, and I'm going to connect those 15-ohs with just one 11-oh in between. And once I do that, I'll go through once or twice just to reinforce that and to hold it and to make sure I don't have any slack. So go ahead and finish that and go ahead and reinforce it, and then we'll go ahead and move on to the back side of the Rivoli bezel. After finishing the front side of the bezel here, I'm going to take my needle and thread, and I'm going to right now I'm coming out of one of my 15-oh beads, so I'm going to go down through one of my 11-oh seed beads. That was part of my bezel, and I'm going to travel through my 8-ohs here on the outside until I get to an 8-oh that's sitting directly below one of my prongs for my bezel. I'm going to go up through one of those seed beads, my one 11-oh, and also going to pass through that 15-oh. So I'm going to repeat essentially the same steps that I took for the first section of my bezel, the first side of that net in my bezel. But on this side, instead of picking up one 11-oh, I'm going to pick up two 11-ohs. So coming out of this 11-oh, or I'm sorry, coming out of this 15-oh, pick up two 11-ohs, and then travel to the next prong and through that 15-oh, another two 11-ohs, through the next 15 in that next prong, and I'm going to continue this the whole way around until I've connected all of the prongs, just like I did on the first side. So the only difference between this side and the first side was that the first side only had one 11-oh connecting between the 15s, and this side has two. So now I've come to my last pair of two 11-ohs. I'm going through this last 15-oh in the prong. So now I've got it all connected. Before I pull this tight, of course, I want to make sure that I get my 10mm Rivoli in there. So just get that in there and push that down so that as you pull your bezel together, you pull that netting that you made for the bezel, all the beads come and overlap that crystal so it holds it around all the edges, and you've got that held in there nice and tight. I'm going to pass through a few more beads here just to give myself a good grip. It really helps to give a nice little tug if you've gone through a couple extra beads. And then what I'm going to do here is pass through only the 11-ohs. So I'm going to skip the 15-ohs entirely and I'm just going to travel through one pair of 11 O's and then through the next pair of 11 O's. And this will also help to just cinch things together. It helps to prevent any of that slack that might be showing. This isn't necessary, but I find that it's very helpful. Okay, now that I've gone through all my sets of 2 11-O's, all my pairs, I'm ready now to start looking at making the snowflake portion of my snowflake. So I've created this inner bezel here, and now I can start looking at all of the branches of my snowflake. So from the point where I am here, I am actually coming out of a couple of my 11-O's. I'm going to go through that 15-O, and I'm going to give a little tug as I go just to make sure I don't leave any slack. Travel down through the 11-O in the prong, and I'm going to pass through one of my 11-O seed beads, or sorry, my 8-O seed beads. I can actually travel through 2 of my 8-O seed beads. So the first pass here, as I work around the circle, and the circle here I'll show you. So here I have my center of my snowflake, and then all of these branches are what we're going to be working on now. And I'm going to work in a herringbone pattern. So I have to establish at the base of each of my branches that herringbone. So to do that, I'm going to travel around the initial set of 16 beads that I picked up, my 16 8-O's, and I'm going to pick up pairs of seed beads so that I can use those as my bases for my branches. Coming out of one of my 8-O's here, and you can see I'm coming out of some of my 8-O's here. This is where I'm going to start building my herringbone. I'm going to pick up a pair of 8-O's, and I'm going to circle back around go back through 2 of those 8-O's, so that as I pull my thread tight, the 2 that I added, the 2 seed beads that I added, are going to sit one on top of the other on top of the pair that I just passed through. Pass through another 2 8-O's, pick up another 2 8-O's, and we're going to go back through the pair, allowing the ones that I'm adding to sit right next to them. And go ahead and continue until you've done this the whole way around, and you're going to actually have the beginning of 9 branches for your snowflake. I have the beginnings of each of my 9 branches of herringbone. So I've got 9 pairs of seed beads here, 9 pairs of 8-O seed beads. I'm coming out, and I'm actually going to flip my project. It's going to be a little easier for me to work this way. So I've got the back of it facing me. I'm coming out of some of my 8-O's here that were part of that original circle of 8-O's that I picked up and I used for my bezel. And I'm going to pass up through the first 8-O in that set of 2 that I added. And if you're familiar with herringbone, this is going to be really easy for you. If you're not, I would just suggest check out some other herringbone patterns and get familiar with it. But you're going to get very familiar with it as you work on this snowflake. So you're going to go up through just one, that first one in the pair of 2, pick up another 2 8-O seed beads, and then down through the second 8-O. And as you do that, as you add those new seed beads, you can go ahead and kind of push them to the sides so that the one is sitting on top of the other. We're going to pick up one 15-O, and then I'm going to pass through the first seed bead in the next set of 2 that I come to. So I've added on 2 seed beads to the first branch of my herringbone, And now I'm going to add another couple seed beads to the next branch of my herringbone. 2 seed beads, 2 8/0s are going to go on my needle. And then I'm going to go down. So when I say down, I'm going towards my crystal here, from the outside in towards my crystal. And down through that second 8/0 seed bead, pick up one of my 15/0s, and then go through the next 8/0 seed bead, the first that's going to be in now what is going to be the third branch that I'm working on. Pick up 2 8/0 seed beads, and again we're going to go down, so we're going now the seed beads will start to sit apart, so they'll start to create this V shape. We want to go through from in between the seed beads to outside here. So we're going from the inside of the seed beads here where that V is, from the center of that pair outward towards our crystal. And we can kind of situate them correctly if we want to. Pick up another 15/0, and then we're going to go through the next 8/0. And that is going to be the first in what is now the 4th branch that I'm working on. So go ahead and continue in this manner until you've added your first row of herringbone, or really your second row of herringbone, to all of the 9 branches. I've picked up my last 2 seed beads. I've added those 2 seed beads to my last or my 9th branch of herringbone here, and I'm picking up my 15/0. And now you'll notice that as we begin a new row of herringbone, and by row it's really more of a layer because we're kind of working from the inside and we're branching outward, no pun intended, we are branching outward. You'll notice that as we move up, it's going to be like a step up as we continue with those layers of branches, or the layers that make up those branches. I have a 15/0 on my needle here, and I'm going to go up through that 1 seed bead like I normally would be, but I'm also going to go up through the seed bead on top of it. And that will always be the way that we step up as we work around in a circle here, and we move farther out and create these longer branches. So every time you get to the last section here, the last branch, you're actually going to go up through 1 more seed bead than you typically would. And that's how you'll know that you've reached the beginning of a new section, or a new layer, as I like to think of it, as we work in a circle here. So now I've created 2 layers of my herringbone, and I'm going to work on my 3rd one. So for the 3rd one, it's going to be very, very similar to the last one. I pick up 2 seed beads and let them fall down, pass through the second 8/0 there. But now this time, instead of a 15, I'm going to pick up one of my 11/0 seed beads. And I'm going to pass, and I'm going to connect to my next branch by going from the bottom to the top, passing up through the seed bead, the 8/0 that's sitting at the very top. So it's on that layer that I just added. I'm going to pick up another 2 seed beads, another 2 of my 8/0s to add to my branch, and I'm going to go down through the next seed bead here. So up through one side of the herringbone, down through the other. Pick up an 8/0, or I'm sorry, pick up an 11/0. When I work with 15s, 8/0s, and 11/0s, I get them confused all the time. So I have my 11/0 on, and I'm just going to go through from the bottom to the top, or from the inside of my project to the outside. I'm going through that first 8/0, so the first one that I'm coming to, and the very outside one on my layers of herringbone, and pick up another 2 seed beads. This is going to be very repetitive. 2 of those 8/0 seed beads down through the next 8/0. So for this layer, I'm essentially repeating the same steps as I did on the last, but I'm picking up an 11/0 seed bead to connect the branches instead of a 15/0. So go ahead and continue until you've got all 9 done, And remember that step up here at the end when you come back to where we started, you'll pick up an 11-0 and go up through 2 8-0s. So once you're at that point, we'll go ahead and we'll continue with the 4th layer of herringbone. For our 4th layer of herringbone, we're going to continue as we have previously, picking up 2 8-0 seed beads down through the next, down through the 2nd seed bead there in our herringbone branch. But this time what we're going to do is we're going to pick up one 11-0, and then we're going to pass through that 11-0 that we picked up on the last row, or that last layer. So we're going to pick up an 11-0 through the 11-0 that we picked up that's sitting right below here, and then we're going to pick up another 11-0 and go through that first 8-0 on the next branch, through that top 8-0 on the next branch. So that will create a little bit of a V with our 11-0s here, and that will fill in a little bit of that gap between the branches. And from here, we're just going to continue as normal, picking up sets of 2 seed beads, 2 8-0s to keep elongating that herringbone, and one 11-0, adding one 11-0 through the 11-0 from the previous row, picking up another 11-0, and again through that first very outer 8-0 on the next branch. So for this row, that's what we're going to do here, filling in a little bit of that gap and adding those 2 11-0s. And then I'll take you on around to the 5th row. For my next row of herringbone, I'm going to again pick up those set of 2 8-0 seed beads and down through my 8-0 there on the branch. And now what I'm going to do is, the only way that this row is going to be different from the last row is what I do here with this 11-0 seed bead. Again, I'm going to pick up one 11-0 seed bead, and I'm going to go down through the 11-0 sitting right below it that I picked up on the last row. And then I'm going to go up through the next 11-0 sitting directly across from it. Pick up another 11-0, up through that 8-0 that we need to start the next branch, the next herringbone branch. And now I can continue with my herringbone. So 2 8-0s and down through that second 8-0. Again, I'm just picking up one 11-0, going down through that 11-0 sitting directly below it that I added on the last round, that last layer of herringbone, and then I'm going to go up through the 11-0 sitting directly across it. Again, one of those 11-0s that I added on the last row. Picking up a new 11-0 that I'm adding, and go up through that 8-0 at the top of my branch of herringbone. So that's how I'm going to add my herringbone on this row. And then the next row will get a little bit more interesting for you. From this point forward, I'm only going to be using my 8-0 seed beads. So I will no longer be confusing my beads. I'm only going to be using my 8-0 seed beads. And I will be creating the outside edge here that gives it that snowflake dimension and that snowflake shape. So again, here, working on my herringbone, I'm going to pick up 2 of my 8-0s, so this is very familiar, and go down through my next 8-0. And then here I'm going to pick up one of my 8-0s again, and I'm going to go down through my 2 11-0s that are sitting right below. So the 2 8-0s that I added on the last couple passes around. And I'm going to go up through the 8-0s on the other side here. So I'm going down through one side of my herringbone and then up through the other side on the next branch. Pick up another 8-0 and then go through the 8-0 on the very end of that branch that I'm going to work on. So this is all very familiar, same steps that we've been taking, but instead of picking up an 11-0, I'm picking up an 8-0, and this is going to create that sort of snowflake look. And again, pick up another couple 11-0s, or sorry, 8-0s, down through the second 8-0. And again, I'm adding another 8-0 here to the outside of the branch. So this is forming a trim on the branch here. I started with a trim of 11-0s, but now I'm adding a trim of 8-0, but just that one, and that will give it that little branch-like appearance. Down through 2 of those 11-0s, so I'm going to go through 1 and then 2. And up through 2 on the other side here, my 2 11-0s. Pick up another 8-0, and then up through that last bead on my next branch. So continue around here, adding the 8-0s here, where we had been adding the 11-0s on the previous passes. And once we do that, we'll go ahead and finish this guy up. We are now on the last pass around, the last layer or row of our herringbone. So to do this layer, it's going to be a little bit different than the other ones. Coming out of one side of my herringbone here, one of my 8-0s, I'm going to pick up just one 8-0. And then down through 2 of my seed beads on the other side of my herringbone. And so by picking up just that one 8-0, it'll give a little point to the end of my herringbone, as you can see here in my sample, instead of having something kind of flat or with a little V or divot in it. So that'll help round out the end of the herringbone. And I'm going to go down through 2 of my seed beads in the herringbone, and I'm also going to pass through that 8-0 that I added on the outside of the herringbone. So that 8-0 that I used instead of that 11-0. So down through 1, and then I'm going to go up through the other one. So similar to a step we had done a few passes back. And up through 2 8-0s on this branch of herringbone. And again, one 8-0 here to cap the end, and down through 2 of my 8-0s in that herringbone. So again, here I have ended that branch of herringbone with just one seed bead here to kind of round it out. Down through the 8-0 there on the outside, and then up through the next one. And this is also why I'm using white thread. Besides the fact that most of my beads are white, you might see a little bit of thread as you connect these 8-0s here. So you can see it's not going to be a complete, they're not going to touch completely. They may not, depends on your beads. So they have the white here just so that everything still stays that nice white color. So if you use different color beads, you might want to change the color of your thread. Up through 2 beads in my herringbone here, and cap it off with just one 8-0. So then down through the next 2 beads there in my herringbone, and again through that 8-0 that was branching off there, and then up through the next one. So what this is doing as I connect them is it's also holding them in place. So it's giving them that thread there to be like a little framework to hold on to hold that shape and push them upward a little bit. And I'm going to continue doing this the whole way around until I've come back to the beginning. And then that will essentially be the end of my project, the very last step that I need to do. After that point, I can create a way to hang it. I can incorporate it. I can use it as just a component. I can make multiples and connect them some way for a really fun bracelet. But I love these as snowflakes to hang in the window. I'm going to go ahead and finish mine, and then I'll show you how I choose to hang them. Once you've completed your snowflakes, you'll want some way to hang them. Now, these are really lovely components. You can always attach them if you want, find a nice way to attach them for a bracelet. You can use it as a centerpiece and then bead something off of it. Of course, if you see two here together, earrings comes to mind, and just add a little loop or a wire guard for an ear wire. But since we're doing something here for the holiday season and I want to add it, I want to hang it around my house in the window or maybe off a doorknob and just have the little something sparkly around my house, and an ear wire just kind of won't cut it. So I'm going to need something a little bit bigger. Something like a 20 gauge non-tarnish or tarnish resistant silver. So this is this 99% silver or fine silver coated copper. So because it's coated copper, it's going to bend really well. So it'll do exactly what I need it to. I cut myself just a few inches here. Anytime you cut yourself a piece of wire, cut it a little bit longer than you think you're going to need it. You can always cut it off. You can add more, not without it being very difficult. So I'm going to use something. I have my thread burner here, so I'm going to use something like my thread burner that's about the size that I want for a loop. And I'm just going to hold the one end of my wire here and bend it around just to help shape my wire. So you can use really anything around the house. You can use a Sharpie marker. You can use a little vase, like anything that you have, a pen, a thick pen, anything that's going to roughly give you that shape. And then what I'm going to do is, on the other side here, I'm going to do the same thing, create the same shape, but in the opposite direction. So just hold that wire on there, hold the tip of the wire, and just use your fingers to manipulate the wire in the direction that you want. And this is very malleable, soft wire. All I'm creating here is an S shape. So essentially, I'm just creating an S, and this will give me something to loop and to hook onto, and then it'll give me a loop or a hook at the top and at the bottom. So I can hook my project to one side or to one hook, and then I can use this other hook here to attach it to a mini Christmas tree or anything else that you want that you would like this to hang from. The last thing I need to do here is, because this has rough edges, I will want to just take care of that so that I don't end up hurting myself or hurting anybody else with these sharp edges. One thing that you want to do is, whenever you're cutting the wire and you have an opportunity here to trim it, take your cutters, your side cutters here, and they're called side cutters for some reason, and I'm going to say this is the reason. The reason that I think of them as side cutters is because there's definitely a right side and a wrong side. So you can comment below if you know the exact reason why they're side cutters, and I'm going to look it up right after this video so I'm more knowledgeable. But the side cutter here is going to have a flat side, and this is the side where if you close it and you run your finger over it, it's pretty flat. The other side here, it is not flat. It's going to have a big divot in it, and you can just tell here that this is not going to get you the best cut. You're going to have this flat side, the side that feels very flat and you can tell is very flat. That is going to be facing the portion of the wire that you want to keep. And so the portion of the wire that you're going to be cutting off and discarding is going to sit inside that divot. And just give it a little snip. And it's always a good idea to cover that with your hand so that little stray pieces of wire don't go flying all around your house. And so then you can contain that wire and throw that out. And we're going to do that with the other end of the wire. Although if you've already cut it this way, you don't have to do this, but I'll do it here for the sake of demonstration. Again, I have the very flat side of the cutters facing the portion of the project, the wire that I'm going to keep, and I'm just going to cut my hand over that so that I can prevent that wire from flying, and I can just take that wire and discard it. So now at this point, I have a little S hook here, and both sides of my S's are pretty much the same. I can manipulate this as much as I want. I can make this smaller. I can make one side larger. You can use something like your thread zap for one side and make this hook, this side of the hook this wide. Then we can move on to a Sharpie marker or something like a very round toothbrush and make this S hook very much smaller in diameter if we want to. It's really up to you. There's really no right or wrong with this. It's just however you want it to look. You can also do a little wire wrapping if you want to and embellish it with crystals. There's tons of things that you can do to make this a little prettier. But for the sake of today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to simply add it to your snowflake here. So I'm going to go ahead and use the smaller side of my S hook, and I'm going to use just the very end here, and I'm simply going to just thread it through one of my 8/0 seed beads. So the 20 gauge is about the largest gauge that you want to use for this, and that will fit comfortably through one of your seed beads. Then at this point, you can close this up if you want. Another thing you can do once you've got your snowflake on here is to make this even more friendly to touching. If you've got kids, or if you have just yourself that you want to make sure that you're not going to touch it and cut yourself, you can do a number of different things. You can use something like a file to file it and make it softer. Or a very simple thing you can do here is take a pair of round nose pliers and just simply grip the very, very end of that wire and give it a little twist inward. And if you give that little twist inward, you'll actually create another little another little hook shape there. But you'll bend it in so that the tip or the end of the wire where it was cut is now curled back in on itself, facing the larger piece of wire. And then you can touch it and you're not going to feel it. So now with this part complete, and again, I can manipulate this as much as I want. It's very soft wire. And then I'm going to do the same thing here. I can either file that somehow, or I can simply just take the very end of it and turn it in on itself so that it's not facing outward. And then I can use this top part here as a little hook for wherever I need to attach it. Take some fishing line if you want. You can also do that and just create a loop like you would do with any other kind of ornament. But this is a little bit dressier, and it gives you some other options if you wanted to embellish it. So there you have it. There is your little snowflake ornament for really any time of the year. We use it mostly around the winter season, but hey, if you live in a really cold place and you have snow all year round, this may be just up your alley for an all year round ornament. If you enjoyed this video, please comment below and let us know your thoughts. You can also subscribe to our channel to be notified as soon as we have more beading tutorials out that you will enjoy probably just as much as you enjoyed this one.